recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony and opening. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context here, and I want to ask a few quick questions, starting with both Colonel Crumrich and Colonel Kalinda. From 2016 to 2021, are you aware that the Taliban had increased its control of territory every year for those consecutive 5 years? Colonel Crumrich?
Yes.
Colonel Kalinda?
Yes, absolutely.
Are you aware of any indications in that 5-year period that the Taliban was internally involved in discussions that indicated that they would be willing to enter into a peace agreement with the government of Afghanistan, or that they believed that continued combat operations was the key to success? Either one of you.
Their participation in the Doha agreement would...
I'm not talking about the participation. I'm talking about intelligence indicating whether or not the Taliban really believed that the path to success for them was a negotiated peace agreement, or whether they were going to continue to press combat operations.
I don't have visibility on the specific intelligence that would lead to their thinking.
Okay.
Mr. Ranking Member, I can provide some insight on that.
Yeah,
so,
please.
In 2017 and 2018, I was in my personal capacity, I was outside of government at that point. I was involved in some Track 2 discussions with the Taliban leaders, their version of diplomats who were in Doha, and then relayed.
You could be succinct here because I have a bunch of other questions.
Yep.
Just answer the question if you can.
When the United States removed the timeline, the Taliban, at least their diplomats, said, we want to start talks because we don't want our country, to use their words, to turn into another Syria.
Okay, so who started those talks, and what president agreed to the Doha agreement?
Those talks started in 2018, I believe, under President Trump.
Okay. And after that agreement was executed, did the Taliban largely stop attacking U.S. soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan?
Yes.
And then after the Taliban stopped attacking soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan, U.S. soldiers, did that allow us to then reduce troop numbers?
I'll answer that. So
Yeah.
there were 7 provisions.
I'm not. I just answer the question. After the Taliban stopped offensive operations against U.S. military in Afghanistan, then did that allow us to reduce troop numbers?
It did.
Okay. And then when did that troop reduction start?
The specific date?
Roughly
speaking. I know that we had started reducing troop numbers after the Doha agreement. Regardless, the Taliban were not meeting the conditions required of them for us to be doing those withdrawals. And at a certain point, there was discussion with
We started in 2020, correct?
Correct.
Largely, drastically reducing troop numbers in 2020.
We did,
Okay.
and we were moving.
Are you, okay, next question. Are you aware of a provision that Mr. Waltz, and Ms. Cheney passed in the 2020 NDAA cycle that would restrict the ability of the Trump administration to reduce troop levels below 2,000 unless certain conditions and certain planning and reports were made to Congress? Are you aware of that provision?
I'm not, but I'm glad you did.
Okay, well, it was passed. It became law. Are you aware that President Trump, in early January, weeks before the transition of the presidency, actually waived that provision so that he could reduce numbers below 2,000?
I know there was a discussion to bring the troops below 2,000, and I know General Milley and senior military commanders advised him not to do it, and they rescinded that order.
So he did it, correct?
He did, then it was rescinded.
That would numbers drop below 2,000 due to a presidential waiver in January 2021, correct? Or if you're not aware, then just say you're not aware.
I would have
Okay,
to.
well, that is true. If we had not withdrawn by the end of August of 2021, is it, I want to hear from each of you very briefly, is it your belief that the Taliban would have resumed combat operations against U.S. soldiers, U.S. troops on the ground? Colonel Krumrich.
I believe if we had not pulled out by that date, that they would have had a hard time once the winter started to be able to actually execute that, which would have given the Afghan government the time and space to get their feet
You
set
don't, your
to be able to
testimony,
fight back
your
against the
testimony
Taliban.
is that you believe the Taliban would not have resumed combat operations against the United States in the fall of 2021.
As long as there was negotiations going at the Taliban, we were telegraphing what our timeline would be, I believe that they would have respected it. It was the only thing they did out of the entire Doha agreement.
Colonel Kalinda?
I think if we did not talk with them and coordinate a new date, and it looked like we were violating our end of the agreement, then I believe the Taliban would have resumed attacks.
Sergeant Major Smith?
Sir, respectfully, I don't have enough information, and I'm not in a position to give my opinion on this matter.
And had they resumed attacks, which most of the intelligence shows they would we have been able to adequately defend ourselves with the roughly 1,000 troops we had, or would we have had to have added troops on the ground? Would we have had to have surged into Afghanistan again? Colonel Krumrich.
My recommendation would have been to add all the force protection required.
So we would have had to have added troops.
Right, I wouldn't call it a surge.
Colonel Kalinda.
I agree, Mr. Ranking Member, that we would have most likely have had to add troops in order to protect ourselves.
Sergeant Major Smith.
Sir, again, I do not have enough information to speak
Okay.
educatedly.
My point here is there was a really, really hard decision that had to be made, that President Biden made, choosing from extremely difficult alternatives that would have potentially caused more conflict and more combat operations through 2021 into the present. Thank you for the additional time. I yield back.
Absolutely. Thank you.